They told me I couldn't dig a well on my land, at my lake, on the ranch I built from scratch with my own 2 hands. The HOA board, sitting up in their shiny, air-conditioned offices, thought they could control what I did with my water. I wanted was a simple well near the lake, just enough to keep things running smooth through the dry season. But instead of working with me, they slapped me with fines, citations, and a permanent ban. No discussion, no compromise. Just a cold letter and a warning. Like I was some tenant renting space, not the guy who owns 300 acres and pays more in property taxes than most of them make in a year. What they forgot, though, is that everything around here runs on water, and I've got the source. You see, years ago, I installed the main pump station that channels water from my lake to the shared pastures downstream. That's the lifeline for over 3,500 head of cattle livestock owned by the very people sitting on that HOA board. For years, I kept it running out of courtesy. But when they cut me off from digging my well, they didn't realize they were cutting their own throat. This isn't just a story about land or rules. It's about control. It's about respect. And sometimes when people push too far, they leave. You no choice but to remind them where the power really lies. I didn't set out to start a war, but I wasn't going to be walked over either. So when I shut that valve, it wasn't out of spite. It was a lesson. And what happened next? Well, let's just say the board didn't see that coming. Stick around, because the fallout from this little water war, it changed everything. The trouble really started about 6 months back during 10C. During one of the driest spring seasons we've had in years. The lake was holding up fine, but I knew I needed a backup, something closer to the barn and the work sheds. That's when I applied for a basic permit to dig a well. Nothing big, nothing deep, just a personal water source to help with livestock rotation and emergency supply. But the HOA had just brought in a new president, Don Whitaker, a city transplant who thought managing a ranch community was like running a suburban cul-de-sac. He didn't like the idea of unregulated digging, as he called it. Even though I had engineering reports, permits ready, and zero impact on shared resources. At first, I thought it was just a delay. But then came the letters, the complaints, and the warnings. Apparently, some of the neighbors had voiced concerns about water rights, though no one ever said a word to my face. They said digging the well might set a precedent and cause issues with the shared grazing zones. What they didn't say out loud, but Kay picked up from more than a few sideways glances at the general meeting, was that they didn't like how much control I already had over the main water system. Years ago, I built the entire irrigation, set up from scratch. I offered to connect their pastures as a good faith gesture, and we never really formalized anything. No contract, no payment, just neighbor helping neighbor. But over time, they started expecting it like it was theirs by right. That was my mistake. So while they were busy tightening their rules, acting like they could dictate how I ran my own ranch, they forgot who kept their cattle from dying of thirst every single summer. And when I saw that final denied stamp on my well request, something in me snapped. After that denial, things got complicated fast. I started hearing whispers from neighbors, some quietly siding with me, others clearly uncomfortable but afraid to speak up against the HOA. The tension wasn't just about the well anymore. It was about who really had the power in this ranch community, and how far some people were willing to go to keep control. Don Whitaker and the board acted like they were doing what was best for everyone, but it felt more like they were protecting their own interests, using rules as weapons to push me out of the picture. Meanwhile, the cattle, the 3,500 head spread across the pastures, became the silent players in this standoff. Without the water from my pump station, the whole ecosystem would start to collapse. I knew that, and I knew they did too. That's why they were so desperate to keep me from digging that well. It wasn't just about water. It was about leverage. They wanted me to be dependent, to follow their rules without question. But here's the thing: this ranch, this land, it's more than just water lines and property lines to me. It's a legacy, a life's work. I wasn't about to sit back and watch it get taken over by a group of people who didn't understand what it took to keep things running out here. At the same time, I wasn't blind to the bigger picture. There were neighbors who genuinely worried about water scarcity and the future of the land. Their voices got lost in the conflict, caught between the board's heavy-handed rules and my pushback. Some started suggesting meetings, others talked about mediation, but trust was broken on both sides. The HOA saw me as a troublemaker, while I saw them as overreaching bureaucrats. Every day, the water sat still in the pipes, waiting for someone to blink. And in the background, the cattle waited too thirsty and completely unaware of the battle. Shaping their fate, days turned into weeks, and the standoff only grew thicker. The HOA board kept pushing, sending more letters, threatening fines, and even talking about legal action to force me to comply. But I wasn't about to back down, not when the stakes were this high. Every time I drove out to the ranch, I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, like I was some kind of enemy invading their carefully controlled little world. The tension was electric, and it wasn't just between me and the board anymore. Neighbors were picking sides, whispers turning into heated arguments at community gatherings. Then came the drought warnings. The weather reports started predicting an even harsher dry spell than before. The pastures, already thirsty, began showing signs of strain. Some neighbors started coming by, quietly asking if I'd consider turning the water back on. Just this once, to keep their cattle alive. I could see the fear in their eyes, their loyalty to the board, cracking under the pressure of reality. But I held firm. If I gave in now, the HOA would only tighten their grip even more. The situation reached a boiling point one afternoon when a group of board members showed up unannounced at the ranch, demanding access to the pump station. They wanted to inspect, to prove I was hoarding water, or worse, that I was somehow breaking the rules. The confrontation was tense, voices raised, and I stood my ground, refusing to hand over control of what was rightfully mine. It was clear this wasn't just about water anymore, it was about control, pride, and survival. As the sun set that day, I locked the gate behind them, knowing that things were about to get much worse. The community was on edge, the cattle's fate hanging in the balance, and the lines between neighbor and enemy blurred like never before. No one knew what would happen next, neither did I. But one thing was certain. The war over water was far from over. Just when I thought the battle couldn't get any more intense, a new problem surfaced that no one saw coming. One early morning, as I was checking the lake's water levels, I noticed something odd. A group of workers was drilling near the far edge of the property. They weren't from the HOA, at least not officially. It turned out the board had secretly hired a contractor to dig their own well, trying to bypass me entirely and secure water for their cattle without my permission. That move shocked Med. Wasn't just about rules anymore. It was about undermining everything I'd built. It's trying to steal control right out from under my nose. But here's the twist. As the drilling got underway, the ground beneath started showing signs of serious instability. The lake's water level began dropping faster than it ever had, and strange cracks appeared in the nearby soil. The contractor called it a hydrological risk, warning that their actions might damage the natural aquifer feeding the entire ranch. Suddenly, the HOA's secret well wasn't just a sneaky move. It was a disaster waiting to happen for everyone. This new threat changed everything. Now, the conflict wasn't just between me and the board. It was about protecting the land itself, the water supply that all of us depended on, and the future of the cattle that had no say in any of this. The neighbors were caught in the middle, many furious at the board's reckless decision. Others worried about losing access to water altogether if the aquifer collapsed. Meanwhile, I've faced a tough choice. Do I keep the water cut off to make my point, risking total disaster, or do I step in to stop the drilling and possibly reopen negotiations with the HOA? The tension in the community skyrocketed as everyone realized this wasn't just a power struggle anymore. It was a fight for survival. And just as the first cracks spread wider across the land, I knew the next move could change everything. What happened next? Well, that's where things get even more complicated. The situation exploded faster than anyone expected. The moment the drilling crew hit a critical fault line underground, water started rushing away from the lake and surrounding wells. Panic spread through the ranch community like wildfire. Cattle were already struggling, and now the very source they all depended on was being drained away. The HOA board scrambled to contain the damage, but their secret well had done irreversible harm to the aquifer. The irony was brutal there. Attempt to wrest control had backfired spectacularly. That's when I stepped in. I called an emergency meeting, inviting everyone, neighbors, board members, even the contractors who had caused this mess. It was clear the only way forward was cooperation, not conflict. We agreed to shut down all drilling immediately and set up a joint water management plan, with me overseeing the main pump station and the HOA agreeing to respect my right to maintain the well on my land. After all, the damage made it obvious. No one could afford to play power games with water. For the first time in months, the water started to stabilize, and the cattle slowly began to recover. The board members, humbled and shaken, accepted that my role was essential, not a threat. We drafted a new community agreement that balanced individual property rights with shared responsibility, putting the health of the land and livestock first. Wasn't perfect, but it was real progress. Just when it seemed the storm had passed, a letter arrived from the County Water Authority. They'd been investigating underground water use and found irregularities, not from me, but from an unexpected source, one of the largest cattle owners in the HOA, quietly pumping more water than allowed, threatening the entire region's supply. Suddenly, the conflict wasn't just between me and the board anymore. It was bigger, messier, and far from over. But this time, I was ready. The discovery from the County Water Authority shook the whole community to its core. It turned out that the real threat wasn't just my stand against the HOA or their secret well-eyed, was the unchecked water use by one of the biggest cattle owners, quietly pumping far more than the land could support. Suddenly, the fight wasn't about petty power struggles. It was about protecting a vital resource that everyone depended on. With the truth out, the HOA had no choice but to shift focus. Instead of blaming each other, the community came together to address the real problem. We worked with the county to establish stricter water use regulations, better monitoring, and fair access for all landowners. That meant no more secret wells or backdoor deals, just transparent cooperation to protect the ranch and its future. In the end, the battle over digging a simple well turned into something much bigger, a lesson about respect, responsibility, and the true value of water in a community built on shared land and hard work. I learned that standing up for your rights isn't just about winning a fight. It's about making sure your voice is heard, and that the land you care about is preserved for generations to come. The HOA board learned the hard way that control without understanding only leads to problems, and the neighbors realized that cooperation beats conflict every time. Most importantly, the cattle and the land got a chance to thrive again, thanks to everyone finally working together. So, if there's one takeaway from all this, it's this: water is life, but it's also power. And when that power is handled with care and respect, it can bring a community together instead of tearing it apart. Thanks for sticking with me through this story There's always more to learn from the land and the people who live on it.